take that intro, YouTube, and suck it. If you know what I'm talking about. So, hey, everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of Cinema Crusaders. It's Friday afternoon, Friday evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Maybe it's Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon if you're all the way over there in Australia. Shout out to Dodgy. But it's time to talk about some classic movies that the Cinema Crusaders like, and we go back and we review them and introduce them to you again, and we hope that you'll check them out. So tonight's entry is recommended by Steve, Shadewing Sellers, who I'll introduce in just a moment. It is the second part of what John Carpenter calls his Apocalypse trilogy, the first part being The Thing, and the third part being In the Mouth of Madness. And this movie is called Prince of Darkness, and it was released in 1987, I believe. But if I'm wrong, I'm sure they'll correct me, my other co-hosts. But we're going to get into this movie. It's really great, and we'll talk a little bit about the plot. But first, I want to introduce my co-hosts. First, I was just talking to him a little while before the show. He is the guy I affectionately call the Mouth of the South because he's got all the details, all the information, all the great data that you would never think to talk about, but when he brings it up, you're like, how did I never see that? He's an artist, he's a writer, he's a good friend. I'm talking about none other than Jeff, Dr. Fate Bracy. How you doing, Jeff?
Buenos dias, or noches, depending on where you happen to be at this time in the world. Prince of Darkness, classic movie. John Carpenter is I'm a longtime fan of John Carpenter's work, and particularly his Apocalypse trilogy. For those of you who are not familiar with the trilogy, this is a series of films, each which potentially deals with the end of the world and people in a crisis trying to do their very best to prevent it. And tonight we're going to find out if they were successful in preventing this particular apocalypse.
Outstanding. Yeah. And I'll thank you not to call me Prince of Darkness. I don't use my official title when I'm out in public. So anyway.
Faux pas.
Next, I want to introduce another great friend. He's a writer. He's a creator. He's an educator. He is part of the Sloppy Spoiler podcast. He's also a comic book writer. Look for Blitz in the Blitz first from Revelation Comics. I'm talking about none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Doing all right. Hello, Prince of Darkness, my old friend. Actually, the Prince of Darkness is not in this movie, but Alice Cooper is. And yeah, this movie, I just thought it would be interesting because I think it connects pretty well to the kind of films that we've been covering in the last few weeks, or like The Black Hole and Event Horizon. It is very much another one of those movies that is very much in the horror theme, but at the same time has a lot of those science fiction elements that kind of turn it almost into a cosmic horror, which I think is really, really interesting. Can't wait to go over this one. John Carpenter is one of my favorite directors as well, so it should be fun.
I think I agree. I'm definitely a huge John Carpenter fan. Interestingly, this is one of the few movies that he's done that I had never seen. I've never seen Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and I've never seen this. So, and I think those are the only two movies he's done I've never seen. And so I watched it, and I absolutely love this movie. It's incredible. So let's dive right into this. You know what? Since it's a Steve Sellers movie, do you want to go ahead and take the plot rundown here and give everybody the basic plot of the movie Prince of Darkness?
Yeah. Now, a lot of this will seem at first like it's one of those Exorcist type movies. You have a priest that dies, and then we find out that he's connected with this ancient order called the Brotherhood of Sleep, which is a long lost sect of the Catholic Church. And it turns out that what they have been hiding for centuries is essentially the devil in liquefied form. And so what ends up happening is Donald Pleasance, who is an unnamed priest in this movie, and you're going to see a lot of classic Carpenter actors in this movie. So he decides, okay, I can't take care of this alone, so I'm going to turn to my old friend, who is played by Victor Wang, who was the guy in
Big Trouble in Little China.
China. I can't believe I forgot.
Egg Shen.
Yep.
Egg Shen.
Yes. Big Trouble in Little China. Egg Shen from Big Trouble in Little China. who plays a scientist and a professor in this. And so what he does is he gets his class of science students and says, yeah, if you want a better grade in my class, you're going to come down over here and help me figure this thing out. So they all get sucked into this thing, which ends up being less classical horror and more about quantum physics and Arthur C. Clarke's law, which is, magic is indistinguishable for science, more or less, from advanced science. And so a lot of this is dealing with quantum physics, advanced science, sort of messages through time travel and all kinds of other weird stuff in other dimensions. So it just all goes downhill from there. There is demonic possession. There's all kinds of craziness. And yet there's a scientific basis, we think. It's a lot of fun.
Now, I think this movie is pretty fascinating because I think it leaves some stuff open for interpretation. It also leaves some things hanging that we're going to talk about at the end. Right. There's a lot here. There's a lot going on here, and it's like you'd love to pick John Carpenter's brain and be, and say, hey, what were you thinking? Which is kind of one of my critiques of the movie, and I said this before we came on the air, is this reminds me a lot of Ghost of Mars, where Ghost of Mars is a very cool set piece within this world, but we don't get a whole lot of meat on the bone. We just get, here's what's going on, you're going to follow it and deal with it, and it's like, come on, man, give me more, and I get that. I guess that's a little bit of criticism I have of the movie, but that's saying that I really like what was going on, and I did. So before we get into the discussion of the concepts and everything, I did want to talk a little bit about the acting. You also already mentioned Victor Wang, who was in Big Trouble in Little China. We had Donald Pleasance, who was in Halloween.
Dennis Dunn also was in Big Trouble in Little China.
Yep, he played
Peter Jason, who was in They Live. Yeah, this is a very much a Carpenter ensemble.
Yeah, he brings a lot. And then there was Emily Blunt, who unfortunately would die tragically a few years ago. I don't think they ever determined what her cause of death was, but she was very good in this movie, I thought, as a researcher. Some of the other acting was hit or miss. John Carpenter, especially at this point in his career, one of the things that for me that was it's endearing and is a sign of Carpenter is that his movies always have a look, a feel, and a sound, because he writes the music for all his movies, that gives it like a B+, A- quality to the movie. Nothing is ever incredibly polished, and that's just part of the charm of it, which is kind of why, as much as I like Escape from LA, it's kind of an outlier, because it was like, this looks too pretty to be, a John Carpenter. But it's way too polished. So
it totally doesn't look like a Carpenter film.
Yeah, but and in
this
the mouth
does, though.
Yeah, In the Mouth of Madness is kind of like in between. It's very well done, but still, it has almost too much production value for a Carpenter film, even though I love that movie. So. But this movie is right in there with The Thing and even Big Trouble in Little China and a bunch of other stuff he does. Village of the Damned. So Vampires, another one of my favorite movies. So I wanted to hear what you guys thought about the overall acting performances and any that you thought really stood out. And I will just say that before I kick it around, that to me, once again, Donald Pleasance really stood out for me. He brings this understated depth of emotion to everything he does. And you saw it when he played Dr. Loomis in Halloween. He doesn't have to over emote to show you his fear, his anger, a number of things. He does it with the priest here. And you could see it. The priest is very guilty. He's angry. He loses faith at one point. There's all these emotions going through him. And I thought Donald Pleasance's performance was really, really, really good. And he always brings it in this understated, almost gentle way. I guess that's the best way I could describe his acting technique. It's gentle, but it's powerful. I mean, you even see it in movies like The Great Escape, where he went blind. He's the counterfeiter that goes blind, and James Garner takes him out. And when he dies in that movie, your heart breaks, because he has no idea what the Nazis are about to shoot him, and the way he emotes to the viewers is unbelievable. So once again, Donald Pleasance doesn't phone it in. and I think that's why John Carpenter brought it back, and thank goodness, because he's absolutely wonderful in this film for me. So let me kick it around. I'm going to start with Jeff, and I'll come to Steve, and then we'll kick it around. So Jeff, what did you think of the acting as a whole, and then anyone you want to talk about in particular?
I think you meant Lisa Blunt.
Yeah, no. Lisa Blunt. I'm sorry, not Emily Blunt. That's somebody else. Yeah.
She's a little young to have been in this film.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think like everybody else, big fan of Donald Pleasance. I mean, it's like you said, he knows how to give a very restrained performance. He knows how to make the most out of being minimalistic, and there's this wonderful undercurrent, because this isn't just a man who's on a religious quest or is a religious fanatic, devout Catholic, although he remains one. And that sets up such an interesting conflict, because he has to reach out to a man of science, because he finds out in the course of the film he has to deal with a tremendous paradigm shift that in the story world created here, the idea of God and the devil and everything is not what he's spent his entire life, devoted to. And in fact, the true nature of the cosmos, if you will, is potentially more stranger and more horrifying than he ever thought it could be, which places this very firmly in the realm of cosmic horror. Lovecraft was always very good about saying if we ever understood how the universe totally worked, we would just go mad as a defense against reality. And you can see him straining. I mean, the guy is pulled taut as he's wrestling with this, trying to wrestle with everything he's known, and now all this new information about, like, the Vatican has had the devil imprisoned for millennia, and what? And he's this jar of goo, and I need to call out the scientists. And like you said, there's this guilt and there's this anger and frustration. It's like, why didn't we tell people? Why were we hiding this? He's dealing with the politics of the situation, as well as being this good man, this man of faith, and then trying to wrestle with the fact, like he's talking to his scientist friend. I forget his name right now.
Birack.
What's that?
Birack.
Yeah, Professor Birack.
Yeah, and he's talking to the professor, and he's like, this was ours. And he's still claiming ownership to us. This was ours. Why? How did we screw this up? Because these guys have had this wonderful relationship for decades. These philosophical debates, the metaphysics versus science, and now it's all come to a head in the most horrific way possible, because you're dealing with this potential end of the world scenario as the goo starts to organize in its container. And here's a man who is facing not only the breakdown of everything that he understood to be true, but the end of everything. And it's all riding on him and these people he's assembled. And Pleasance just does the most amazing job. If you watch the arc of the character right up until the end, and for him at least, it's a very satisfying arc. It's a horror movie, so it's not going to be very satisfying for a lot of people, but it's a very satisfying arc, and you feel his relief and his redemption and his hope. Although, if that's really the case, I guess we'll get into that as we go a little further along.
Hold on to that idea, because I want to talk about, I'm going to get back to the horror movie aspects of this movie, and percolate this in both your brains. Does the introduction of this classic horror movie slasher stuff take away from what was really a movie about some pretty deep thoughts, or is it fine that way? So I'll ask you that question in a minute, but first I want to go to Steve on this acting bit.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot to add about Donald Pleasance. I mean, that guy is a legend. I mean, he's done so many really great films. not just with Carpenter, but with plenty of other directors. Like, I can't think of a bad movie. Well, I can't think of a bad performance that he's made. He's made great performance in bad movies. So you've got to respect this guy as an actor. I mean, he's and he looms very much larger than life in this movie. He is definitely the top billed guy. So
I will just throw out there that I don't think that he was a great fit for Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But he did the best with it. He could with that. Yeah. So but yeah, he's just one of those guys that you can always depend on to deliver the goods. And like Nick Cage just said, it's like, I did not phone this in. Like, none of I've been in a lot of bad movies. I did not phone any of them in. And I think the same can be said of Pleasance. And you can definitely see that.
But debate
a lot of
it was You Only Live Twice, not Diamonds Are Forever, before Bond fans come for me. So
okay. And so you're dealing with an actor who definitely knows what he brings to the table. A lot of his performance, I think, is very physical, very visual, particularly towards the end. He's trying not to give himself away to the monsters, basically. But at the same time, you can kind of see him like holding the rosary, kind of like praying at one point, and you can definitely see that he's struggling with his faith as he's trying to find the strength to grab that axe and hit the guy in the back. All of these kinds of things that you're sort of seeing with Pleasance. So yeah, he's always going to do well. I did like Victor Wang as Barack. I think that he's definitely got that sort of charisma, even though he kind of doesn't look like a classical Hollywood type of actor. He's definitely got the kind of presence that you kind of listen to him, even when he's up against more Hollywood looking guys like Jameson Parker. He definitely has that sort of look, and he just brings enough authority, enough charisma with it that you can definitely tell that it works. And he plays very well opposite Pleasance. I feel like they're both equally matched, Barack and Pleasance, with the idea of bringing together faith and science, to solve the puzzle, because neither of them can answer it alone. You need to have what faith provides and what the superstition and the tradition involves, the religious tradition. And you also need to have the science that can kind of read into the tradition and say how much of this is real and how much of this is legend that was added on. And I think that both actors are very good at representing their points of view. I felt like those two really, for me, carried the movie very, very well. One surprising actor that I really liked was the guy who played Calder. I want to say his name is James Ferguson. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But he was the guy that plays the dude who gets possessed and then slits his throat.
Right.
And I really liked him because he seemed really partly like he was crazy, but also partly you could see that internally he's kind of struggling to break control of this thing. And you kind of makes you wonder, like, how much of is the demon really influencing him, and how much of it is his real self trying to get out. Maybe is he slashing his throat because he would rather die than be under control of this thing. Very tragic character.
Jesse Lawrence.
Jerry Lawrence. Okay.
Jesse.
Okay.
What I think was the interesting aspect of that, his performance, was that he brought an almost, I'm going to say, he was possessed, but it felt like through his performance, he was holding on to a little bit of his soul and very much brought through a Southern Baptist type a part of his personality coming out. So like when he was singing Amazing Grace as he's getting ready to kill himself, it's almost like that was his last little bit of rebellion, is singing that, even though it comes off really creepy. It was a very cool and creepy performance. So,
I mean, you got to think about
and I will say, I'm actually impressed with that character just because he's the only character that we see that finds any strength at all to resist the demon controlling him.
Yeah, everybody else is just gone as soon as they're taken. This guy is the only one who retained any of his personality.
Yeah, so I think that was very fascinating. And it's almost like you could see a lot of John Carpenter, the person, in all of his films. And, John Carpenter grew up in Kentucky, I believe. So it's almost like you could see some element of, what he saw through Southern Baptists in Kentucky in that character. I don't think that's too far of a stretch.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Hades.
Hey, Paul.
So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Steve, you hit on a point, and I'm going to get to that other question, but I think that this segues nicely into there's a real examination here of who can change their worldview and how difficult it is between either science or religion based on new information. There's obviously one very religious person, which is the priest, and he's had to change his worldview, but he had time to come to that before we even get to the events of this movie. And then you have all the scientists, and there's some scientists that absolutely refuse to acknowledge it at all. And I found it interesting that all of them were the first ones to die. Yep. When they refused to acknowledge the reality of the situation around them. I thought it was really, really just an interesting concept. So I wanted to go around and see if you guys had any insight onto that as well, as that how the characters dealt with the changing nature of what they thought was real or not. And to be, one last thing I'll say before I go to Steve is that Carpenter set this up brilliantly with Professor Barak when he was teaching the physics class, who talked about, we think, the flesh, the blood, the wind, we think we know what's going on. And this goes into quantum physics, when in reality, we really don't know anything. We only know this little bit of what we experience. So, and they even talk about Schrodinger's cat and a whole bunch of other things, related to that. So, Steve, what did you think about that duality and about them having to come to grips with a new paradigm of reality?
Yeah, I have to agree. I do think that there is a bit of adapt or die in this. If you're not able to adapt to the idea of faith, and you're not willing to accept the idea of things that you can't explain with conventional science, this movie punishes you badly. You end up getting killed, possessed, or any number of horrible things. And I think Barak, shows probably is the best example of a scientist who's saying, okay, I'm trained in science. I know, all of the rules of the universe that we understand at this moment, but I'm enough of a scientist to say I can change my worldview when presented with evidence that what I know is not sufficient. If basically the whole idea of eliminate the improbable, eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And I think that for Barak, he kind of sees this with quantum physics. And so when he starts teaching, that the idea that at the subatomic level, when you start getting past that, the conventional order that we understand breaks down, and it's something completely else that is very difficult to quantify or understand. And what I just love about this is how much of this is based in real world science, or at least the real world science as it was understood in the 1980s, which I think is scary that it still holds up now. Yeah. So all those elements work. So you have the characters that kind of follow a little bit more, or they're more willing, to put their hands in faith because they don't have anything else to rely on, because their science is not helping them against this thing. At least science by itself, or conventional science by itself. So they have to look for things that work given the new paradigm. So, the example of, you see that this thing reacts to the mirrors, and so what do you do with that? This sort of thought process that has to adjust, but also keeping in mind that, we can't deny what we're seeing. I mean, this woman got turned into a demon. How do you, but so we have to figure out how, why, and then what do we do about that, with the scientific process, but we have to accept the reality of the situation that we're in. And so, this is where you get characters like Jameson Parker's character and, Catherine and all the things that they're doing. Oh, hi, Mike.
Mike.
So when you start to see that process with these characters, and you see the characters that are more willing, to sort of go along with that, the ones that are more in line with Barak's point of view, those are the ones that usually find the way to get out of this in one piece for the most part. Or at least they're able to find a solution to the problem.
Now, I think that's really fascinating what you're saying. I agree with it 100%. And, it all goes back to Bill and Ted and the Socrates quote, which is the only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing, and yeah. But I'm going to add this little wrinkle in before I go to Jeff. we've talked about the scientist, and I said that Donald Pleasance had made up his mind, the priest. However, he comes to another realization at the end of the movie when the Prince of Darkness presumably is trying to bring his father over. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with that.
When
all religions are true, aren't they, Mike?
When he's trying to bring his father over, the priest is praying for Jesus to come and save him. And then he comes to a new paradigm shift. Instead of praying for salvation, he looks at the axe and says, I could do it myself. I will save it myself. Even to the point where it's almost like he's gotten hubris and become arrogant as they're wheeling away on the stretcher. He's like, I'm the one that saved the world. I'm the one that stopped it, which is the exact opposite of what a priest should be saying. He should be praying for salvation and stuff. So that's an interesting twist in there that could easily be missed, but I think it's such clever writing from John Carpenter. So same question to you, though, with that little twist. What did you think about this duality and the characters evolving, Jeff?
And this is part of the character arc I was talking about for Pleasance in there. As a man of faith, the man of the cloth, he's a man who serves. And there's politicking within the Catholic order. There's hierarchy. There's even ambition. We know whenever you start to get a system in place, and the larger the system goes, there's always room for corruption. But not for Pleasance's character, at least not initially. He's very happy being a servant. He's very happy serving the church, serving his parishioners, serving his flock, serving his community, serving the world. But by the end here, this total crisis of faith across many strata, like you said, it changes him. And all of a sudden, he becomes the hero of his story. He's no longer the servant. There is a level of entitlement there and this demand for recognition. And I can't help but think that when he goes back and he makes his report to the archdiocese, that he's expecting to get something out of this. I am canonized now. I am Saint, so-and-so.
Yeah. And I'll even add before you continue, we talk about Catholics and Catholicism, you look at a very Catholic movie or a series of movies, Exorcist, Exorcist 2, Exorcist 3. And Exorcist 3, the central part is the rite of exorcism. And one of those in there, one of the lines in that rite of exorcism is Savior, Servant, Lord. So it's like, talk about, you could almost say that he was corrupted. So he became the hero, but lost the spiritual battle.
And I do feel like that's the case. A hero doesn't demand recognition. I mean,
and he's not the only one.
Yeah, not everybody can be Booster Gold. I mean, come on. most true heroes are Superman or Captain America, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It goes back to what we talked about with Event Horizon, which is that when you face the devil, sometimes the devil gets you.
Yeah.
I think we've seen a little bit of that, not just with Pleasance, but also with Jameson Parker.
Yeah. How's the quote going?
Definitely.
Let's see. Beware when ye fight dragons, lest ye become a dragon.
Yeah.
So when you look into the abyss looks back into you, and he's gone through that. Like I said, it's a satisfying arc in a way because he goes from a position of like low power as a servant to a higher power, higher status sort of thing. But it's not a good thing. It's satisfying in the fact that like this was an interesting character arc to see. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the context of the character going out farther away from this, it's probably not going to be a good thing. And if we were to expand this world, it might even lead to the terrible future that we get glimpses of. And as to your other point about the duality of things, Michael Crichton wrote a wonderful book called Timeline.
Oh, great book. A pretty good movie, actually, to be honest with you. So
terrific book, which also dealt with quantum mechanics and quantum theory. And I love the stuff that's in here. When we talk about Schrodinger's cat, we talk about things like superposition. We obviously have quantum entanglement and quantum tunneling going on in this story. And the brilliance of the intro in the classroom, talking about how quantum mechanics just breaks all of our known laws of physics. When you get into these areas where like particles of matter exist at 2 points simultaneously or in two different instances of time, we've got no way of properly explaining this sort of thing. And that's what some of the students fail to understand, and that's why they end up paying for it in the end. Yeah, you damn right.
Very true.
So if you can't wrap your head around that, this is to bring a little bit more science into it. This becomes like a crazy sort of Darwinism here, as we're seeing the herd getting culled, and only the strongest truly survive this experience. Now, the brilliance of the Crichton thing as well was he had this preface before the book started talking about how like in say like I don't know 1867, I don't remember the timeline, said scientists thought we were on the verge of discovering everything. There'll be no more new discoveries. We'll just progress into what we know. And they're like, oh, decades of centuries later, no. We've got it all figured out now. Until the next thing and the next thing, and then finally, and then quantum mechanics proves like we had no idea. And that's a funny thing about the scientists here. Now, here we see this religious man, is flexible enough in his perception that even though this clearly hurts him to his soul, he's able to wrap his head around the situation. I've still got to save the day, because that's what the church is. We're here to save people, spiritually or otherwise. So, like, I got to save the day, and if that means reaching across the aisle to my scientific brother, so be it. But when we watch the scientists, and this is an unfortunate thing we see in science sometimes, is scientists are very reticent to amend science, because once you've got your theory in place, you don't like to let go of it. Okay. And so they say, like, the science is settled, which is a fallacy, because the science is never settled. So you don't fall for that sort of hokum, because eventually somebody will come along, and then you can't deny the repeated experiments. Like, okay, we've got to change our way of thinking, but people don't want to change their way of thinking. And when we watch these people grounded, the scientists, interestingly enough, in their fundamentalism, they're the ones who die, because they don't have the flexibility to adapt and survive.
And I think it's interesting too, because there's a scene where Donald Pleasance is talking about the church and covering this up, and how the church's beliefs came about. And he's saying we sold them a product in order to keep our power and our, and I think it's an interesting concept. But you brought up something else, both of you, and I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to start with Jeff, then go to Steve. And I'm going to get to my other question about horror eventually, but I think there's some other stuff I want to hit first. One of the central aspects of Donald Pleasance's character is people deserve to know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady comes up to him who is possessed and says, "Thank you so much, Father, for the great work you're doing." And Donald Pleasance there knows, because he looks and he sees she's got the rotting stuff, that they're doing something at that point. He knows they're doing something, but he's so committed to the truth that they release this greater evil. So I'm going to ask you the question, and then I'll start with Jeff and go to Steve. Do you think John Carpenter is making a point about the relentless search of truth and what the consequences can be? Jeff.
There's a good point to be made there, because, like, let's look at some things that have happened in science. When we look at the creation of the hydrogen bomb, there were a number of scientists who left that particular quorum because there was a tremendous debate that if we ignited the hydrogen bomb, that we were actually going to ignite all the hydrogen in the atmosphere of this planet and destroy the world. And, there was a lot of argument back and forth, of course, and, our math is better than your math. It's not going to happen. And fortunately, that was so. But, there's a certain amount of arrogance to that sort of thing. We had the same concerns when they first turned on the CERN. Were we about to create a micro black hole and potentially destroy our world? And, people decided like they weren't risking enough, averse not to. I'm sure they had all the math. Everything looked good. But I keep coming away with lessons from my sci-fi. Like when you look at movies like Mimic, it's like, the Judas breed, they all died out. It's like, yeah, but you let them out of the lab. And as Ian Malcolm would tell us, life finds a way. So you don't know what's going to happen when you put something out into the world unbound. Sometimes ignorance is not just bliss. Sometimes ignorance is the right thing to do, I think. This is a personal belief. I am all for advancement and progress, but there are some areas that I just don't believe we should go to.
I think it's such an interesting question before I get to Steve. And it's to be honest with you, I'm not sure what John Carpenter's beliefs are on religion and stuff like that. I have no clue. But it's a very biblical question because it goes all the way back to Genesis. And
I was about to say, let me add that the search for absolute truth led to the fall.
Right. So, it's called the tree of knowledge, and it is what it is. You could take whatever lessons you want from it. But I think that's always the struggle we have is there are definitely people out there that feel all knowledge is useful, no matter how bad it is. Knowledge is its own reward. And then I think there's people that are Luddites, for lack of a better term, that don't want any change. And then I think there's probably some happy medium in the middle, but that's me pontificating. That's, not me putting anything on this movie. So stepping down off my soapbox now, Steve, what did you think about this concept? Do you think that John Carpenter was making a comment about the pursuit of truth?
Maybe yes and no. I mean, definitely, forbidden knowledge and the bad consequences of it is something that is a big thing in horror. You definitely find that a lot of situations like this is because they dug too deep, greedily and too deep, and they unlocked the horrible thing in there, and clearly they did that. And the scientists themselves ask, should we leave this alone? They seem to kind of imply that this thing was going to get out regardless. That it was necessary to look into this before it grew so dangerous that it was going to get out on its own. So they were looking for a way to contain it. So I'm not sure necessarily that in this film it was necessarily a situation where he's saying, okay, yeah, if you leave this alone, then this will go away. I don't really get that sense. That having been said, there are some things in the film that kind of make you kind of wonder if there is a bit of a counter argument to this. There was one scene where Calder, the guy that slits his throat before he gets possessed, is looking into the linguist and what she's translating and what she's got on the computer screen. And so as he looks in the screen, she starts typing, you will not be saved by the Holy Ghost. You will not be saved by the God Plutonian. You will not be saved at all.
That was a strange line, though. That you will not be saved by the God Plutonium.
And I'm kind of wondering, is he equating the devil in here, the devil that they've unleashed, to the nuclear bomb? Yeah, I figured you would appreciate the Tolkien reference, Mike. But yeah, I mean, so is it in fact, something that is being related to the nuclear bomb? Because we're still dealing with the Cold War in the mid '80s at the time, so it could be something akin to that. Whether in fact we're talking about two situations where, by two different directions, faith and science, they are unlocking things that should maybe be contained. I think that there's an interesting argument. I don't think that Carpenter gives us any definitive answers. I think he's trying to make you think. I don't think he's trying to lead you to an outcome. But he leaves a lot of little things here and there that makes you wonder, is it a good idea to be for absolute truth or not? Because from their points of view, both the priest and Barack are looking for truth. This is why they're friends. Because the one thing that they agree on is that they're looking for the truth, and they're willing to set aside their own personal prejudices to find the truth wherever it is. And I think they're kind of wondering, is that, a good thing or not? Is it necessary to dig into this thing, and see where this goes? Or is it a case where, we have to learn about this thing now, because otherwise, if we don't, this thing's going to come out and then we're really going to be screwed, because we're not prepared. So, I think you can make a case one way or another on this, but I think it is an interesting scenario.
I agree with what you're saying, and definitely when you put it that way, I think that there's a lot in this movie that's left to interpretation, which would bring me to the end of the movie. But I want to save the discussion of the end and theories about how we tie this all up towards the end, because we're going to have to give some serious spoiler warnings before we go into that. So first, I want to ask you this question more about the production. I think this is the kind of movie. I love movies that get my brain going in different directions, make me think as a writer, make me think as, from a religious point of view, make me, evaluate philosophy. I think this is one of those movies and had a lot of elements to it. I think it could have gone even deeper, in my opinion. And so this is just my opinion. I want to hear your guys' take on it. I think Carpenter, the way they sold it and the way they made this movie and turned it into a typical 80s horror movie took away from those elements. And I don't know that the movie could have been made if it was simply just an evaluation of all these deep thoughts, for lack of a better term. I don't know that they would have greenlit the movie. However, I found that the least interesting and compelling moments of the movie were all the various horror elements, classic horror elements in it, with people getting killed and people getting eaten by bugs, everything else. Those were the least interesting moments of the movie to me, and this is me saying that when I love John Carpenter movies. So, and I do like this movie, don't get me wrong. So I want to hear what you guys think about that. Did it add to it? Did it take away from it? Did it do neither? I'll start with Steve and then go to Jeff.
I love that it's just a big twist on the classic Exorcist type of thing. They subvert so much of the classic setup. You have a priest who is absolutely, for the most part in the movie, powerless. This is not a case where he can just go and intone in Latin, say the power of Christ will compel you and have that mean anything. It means absolutely nothing in this movie because everything is on this quantum scientific level. So I found things like that interesting. I find it interesting, that really it's like, the idea that so much of it is on a quantum level, and it seems like, all the things that you typically would work on the devil doesn't work. They're in a church, and the devil doesn't care, because all of these are universal things. I find that really interesting.
I guess just to clarify real quick, yeah. I was saying the parts that I took away from me, and not any of those, because I did find this interesting. Parts that took away from me are like the classic slasher thing. So a minute of seeing the knife or the scissors coming up and down, the stabbing or the heads and stuff like that.
Yeah, for the most part, I would say yes to that. Because it's not really the stuff where they're playing it straight that's interesting. It's the stuff that they're subverting that makes it interesting. Yeah. And both thematically and in terms of what they're doing in terms of the tropes. That's where it deviates from the classic Exorcist type of setup. That makes it interesting. Where they try to play it straight, it's like, okay, this guy's going to get killed. And these people are stupid and they split up and they get killed. And you have to have that for the movie. Mm-hmm.
And you can see it from a mile away. It's like when the guy gets his neck twisted, which was so... I laughed out loud at that because it's like all he did, it would look like a chiropractic adjustment instead of like twisting his neck around. But
Yeah, I mean, and there's some stuff that's really creepy, like the woman that was climbing on top of the Asian girl, and spitting in her mouth, and I'm like that is kind of uncomfortable. That is kind of creepy.
Well, to be honest, watching that scene, I thought that the sexual harassment police were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
I was like,
but then we're talking about a movie that early on,
it was 1987. We didn't have that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Where the main character basically says, basically I'm sexist. I'm like, what?
Yeah. So I thought that was
this
crazy.
is the 80s, guys.
Well, and then Danny Dunn's character was talking about teenage angst and how he was diagnosed with homosexual anxiety or something like that. I was like, where did that come from?
You would never see, like, a lot of the dialogue you would never see today. Not at all. Adding a philosophical search or meaning to a film, only increasing its depth, that makes it more intriguing. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. But there are also certain elements where it's not completely resolved for you, and it's a little frustrating. But I think we're gonna get into that later on.
Yeah, that's going to be the next topic, and we'll go ahead and that's going to take a little while to discuss. But first, I want to hit on Jeff. What did you think about, what did you think about adding those classic, I guess, slasher flick or classic horror moments to the movie? How did that add to you? So, like, for example, the scene where the guy is being eaten by bugs, and his head falls off and everything. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I get where you're coming from. When I first saw it, I liked the movie. But I thought, for instance, like the possessed people attacking each other with streams of water looked really silly. It wasn't until Doctor Who is the Water of Mars that this same sort of setup was done very effectively. And like Steve said, the creepiest moment for me is when the possessed lady climbs up on top of the Asian lady in her bunk. That was incredibly menacing. Very predatory. Like, hats off to the actress for how she handled that. I didn't mind the slasher moments so much, but the impact of them wasn't great. It was the moment up until, because one thing that Carpenter is the master of is this building tension towards the moment of the ecstatic release of the death, if you will.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah, when you see like the poor guy who's trapped down the alleyway before Alice, when Alice Cooper runs the bike through him, you're like, okay, that's silly. That doesn't happen. But that's the 80s. We had a lot of kills like that in the 80s.
Mm.
I will add that Alice Cooper is very, very creepy in this movie.
Yeah.
I think that, you saying that makes me reflect that maybe I'm a little bit jaded because I've seen those effects in so many movies that they don't have the same emotional punch for me.
It's very dated by now. Like, and like a normal human being, because the mob of the indigent homeless, they're not possessed in the same way as the people who've actually got the living water within them.
Mm-hmm.
They're just people with weak wills who have been subsumed by the emanating evil within this church. So like, you can't run a bicycle frame through a person. But in the 80s, we accepted a lot of stuff like that. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger takes a pipe and he throws it through a dude who's wearing a chainmail vest, and we're like, cool, we can do it. So we hand wave a lot of this stuff off because it's fun and it's entertaining. I didn't mind the guy's neck snap at all, but it's really all about the moments leading up to that. That's the excitement, and when the payoff comes, you're just kind of ready to move on to the next thing, because it doesn't matter. Like we've said, the most interesting things here.
Alice Cooper, yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, he's always creepy. He made his whole career on being creepy, but yeah, he's especially creepy in this movie.
And kudos to Jeff for watching Commando, by the way. So,
it's the 80s, a decade. But kind of lost my train of thought now.
When I said I would kill you last, I lied.
Yeah, like this, the elements of this this contradiction of what's going on here. Those are the most interesting elements. The philosophical discussion that's going on, and the wonderful topsy-turvy thing Carpenter did, because the 80s was a time of a lot of demonic possession movies. Among like every genre of horror was explored. Coming from The Exorcist forward, and like the 80s was a big time for like all kinds of very good to just very bad movies, be they action or horror, but very genre specific. And there were movies coming out like The Unholy or Ghoulies or a whole bunch of other movies that all involve some sort of demonic esoterica going on. And I love how Carpenter is like, if you're a real auteur or creative, you don't want to do what everybody else has done. So I love the way he turned it all on its head by thinking about this new emerging science of quantum mechanics, and just trying to put a spin on it that we'd never seen before, and arguably since. I haven't seen anything quite like Prince of Darkness since it came out.
I said before we came online, I think the closest movie I would equate this to, but it deals with a completely different scientific regimen, is Flatliners, where they explore this idea of you go and you die, and then you bring someone back. where did they go? Do you always bring the same soul back into the same body? There's a whole host of questions there. It's a cool movie for some questions. Everything. I don't think it's the greatest movie in the world, but it's an interesting watch if you ever get a chance to go check it out. So
yeah, don't watch the remake.
Yeah, Kiefer Sutherland I think is in it. I forget who else. There's a couple of those. What's her from?
Thank you, Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts, yes. So I think it's pretty good. So
Kevin Bacon.
All right. Oh, I forgot Kevin Bacon's in everything.
Yeah.
6 degrees from it,
baby.
Yeah. So this brings me to the last question. And before I ask this question, spoiler alert for everyone watching this. We'll give you a few seconds to hop out if you want to. We're really going to spoil the ending of the movie here. So if you haven't seen the movie and you want to see it before you hear about how the movie ends, go ahead and turn this off right now. Go watch the movie and come back to hear our discussion. All right? So you're fair warned? You're all ready? You hanging in? Okay. Spoilers for the ending. Last time I'm going to say. All right. Ending of the movie. So we hinted a little bit that Donald Pleasance saves the day. He smashes the mirror. But the questions that were really left unsaid for me was there's this series of dreams that are this warning about who is going to come out of this church. And there's this whole love story set up, which is a little out of place until the very end, where it's kind of realized. And this guy has this connection to the woman who also is the real hero of the movie, or at least we think she is, because she dives in and takes the Prince of Darkness with her into this other dimension as he was about to bring his father through. So here are my questions, and I'm just going to throw them out there because I really don't know the answers to them. I just saw the movie today. I haven't even had time to really formulate answers, but these are my questions. But then I want to hear your guys' thoughts about the ending. And if you have answers to my questions, hey, lay them on me. So my questions are this. That demonic hand that was about to come through, that the Prince of Darkness was shown, is that the devil? They said it was a god. But
the anti-god.
The anti-god, the father anti-god of the being, yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, that looked really demonic. That's number one. Number two, when the guy is reaching for the mirror at the end and then it pops off, is he about to go through the mirror? Is there nothing there? Do we not know? Is that a Schrodinger's cat where we can't decide if we watch it? We don't know one way or the other. That's number two. Number three is, do you believe that one of the physicists is the ones that record the message? That's what I believe. Now, I did come up with the idea that records the message of the dream about her coming through eventually. I think that's one of the physicists sending a message back. But I could be wrong. I think too. I could be wrong on that.
No, I think you're right. Okay. What I think happened is that Jameson, basically Brian Marsh is the one who was involved with the girl. I think he wanted to bring her back. And he would have done anything to bring her back. And so, he's like, okay, I'm going to see if I can go and try to reach my hand through the mirror and see if that works and I can save her. And unfortunately, along the way, he probably ends up bringing the devil through it. And this is where I think we're starting to see in the tape. And I think maybe if he survived that, he's probably the one who developed the technology to send the message back. Because honestly, I think it had to be one of them. Because otherwise, how do you have the knowledge of this thing and of this area and of what happens and of exactly what year you need to go and do this to give the message to? It had to have been somebody there, and it had to be somebody who was knowledgeable enough in science to do that. So I would say I don't think it was Barack, because I think he would have been by that point. It would have been too old by 1999. So my guess would have been it was one of his disciples, like 20 years later. So my guess it was Jameson or like one of the other people.
Interesting. What about you, Jeff? What did you think about the ending of the movie? About those questions we got? I mean, there's a whole host of questions we could talk. So let's kind of do this roundtable format. But it's so up in the air. There leaves so many questions. It's like, I'll be honest with you. Before I go to you, when I saw that hand, it threw me off. Because that hand was almost, dare I say, a biblical representation of the devil, which was so just threw me for a loop. It was dare I say, sinister. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like now that's something I always found very interesting, where like if we're if we've deconstructed the devil down into this liquid, and we never see the devil realized as anything more than a grotesquely possessed body in the form of that blonde-headed girl whose flesh was transformed by having the essence of the liquid devil within her. Now, Mike, I believe it was Mike from Omen Comics, just pointed out, is like, he's the Prince of Darkness. So what if it's darkness? There you go.
Are you thinking like Darkness from Legend?
Well, that's exactly where I was going, because that hand, as soon as I saw it, I was like, that looks exactly like Darkness from Legend, who looks very much like the iconic image of the devil. I don't remember if that movie came out.
I think it came out maybe like a couple of years before this.
Is that the character that Tim Curry played?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he has that classic Renaissance Victorian painting image of the devil, the scarlet skin, the long black nails, all that. And I find that very interesting, because if this is the anti-god, the devil, the devil's devil, if you will, the father of the devil, what have you, that it looks like all of our depictions. What does that say?
Yeah.
There is a thing in quantum mechanics that says the very fact of observation.
Oh, you SOB,
Yes.
man. That is such an interesting point.
That too. This is why we don't. Yeah, I think this is why I think that they don't show us what happens. Because the minute that it's observed, it becomes a fact.
See, this is why we always go to Jeff. Such an incredible point.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, they have experienced in doing study of quantum mechanics that you have to walk away from your experiment and wait till the result happens to look, because they have found quantifiably, if you observe the experiment, your expectation will alter the experiment, even though there is no physical way that can be happening. So if you can wrap your minds around this, folks, your thoughts are manipulating reality. So this is the devil that we expect. So this is the devil we get. And so that's been part of our iconography forever. So even though we're seeing it in this realm that it's trapped in, that it wants to enter into our world, it's already reaching, and it has the shape that we expect it to have. We have chosen the form of our destroyer, if you will. And so that's sort of what I believe is going on there. I
think the same is going on with the dark figure in the dream, because we never see the who that person is until the very, very end. So it's also a case. And actually, I think that it was actually the guy who played Calder that played the dark figure when he's in shadow. So I think it's kind of leading us to think that, okay, it's Calder, and then it turns out no, it's in fact Catherine.
And if this thing
because we observe it,
and if this thing is reaching across time and space to him, you're very welcome. If it is reaching across time and space to him, it's going to show him the thing that he wants most to motivate him to actually complete its cycle. Because as we see, the transmissions from the future are still happening. So if we have forestalled the apocalypse, then why do we still have that, unless all of this is a causality loop, where what we've done in the past affects the future, and then what happens in the future affects the past, and just keeps going around in this circle. So
unless it's a time loop and nothing can change, that's certainly possible as well.
So I'm with you, Steve, that there's, and I love the idea that they introduced in Doctor Who, that there are fixed points in time, that it has to be somebody who was there. They have to know the time, they have to know the date, they have to know the situation, and that's the only way you can transmit your warning back. And I always thought that when we saw her coming out of the church, it wasn't her. I always thought that was very malevolent, that maybe this was the new form of the destroyer, if you will. And so I always
she's possessed by the devil, very clearly.
Yeah, like we, out of the 3 apocalypse movies, I feel like the first one, the apocalypse is, in my opinion, I think the apocalypse is forestalled. And the thing, I think with Prince of Evil, it's a maybe. And with In the Mouth of Madness, we lose.
Yeah, it's over.
I would say it's almost superpositioned. You observe the ending, you observe the outcome of the apocalypse, it happens. So whatever your expectations are, that's what happened.
These movies don't really tie together, especially the.
Not directly, but thematically they kind of
just
do.
a theme, yeah.
Right, but what I was going to say is, I could make a stretch how the first one could kind of tie into the second one, maybe, but the second one tying into the third one, I could see a world where the events of the second one happen and lead into the events of the third, and it's all tied together. I could see how you could write in between. It would be
another fun movie about how thought affects reality.
Yeah. So I could definitely see Sutter Kane having had a run-in with the Prince of Darkness, coming out of this church. And then he in turn brings all the other creatures from this dimension through and in the mouth of madness and everything goes with there.
They do show like these Lovecraftian outer gods that give him this ability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I could definitely see that happening. And you could even make the argument then that maybe, if you really wanted to stretch it, that the Thing is kind of one of these creatures or a spawn or something like that. But that's a real stretch, and it was never intended for everyone to be clear. John Carpenter has never said that the movies are connected. They're just his apocalypse trilogy because there's 3 movies where he talks about apocalypse.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for directors to do non-linear thematic films. Like if you look at the works of Lars von Trier, for instance, he's got a trilogy of films that aren't really connected, but they use a couple of the same actors throughout.
Yeah. Although I do think it's fun to think of, to me, now that you bring it up. And like I said, I've never seen Prince of Darkness, just saw it now, but thinking about it, I think there's a fun way to connect fun for us, not fun for them, to connect Prince of Darkness within the Mouth of Madness. I think it's possible.
I would like
that could be fun.
Yeah.
I don't think there is, but it could be fun.
Yeah.
I would like to say about the film, Nim, that I do believe that, as you suppose, that this film wouldn't have got made if it tried to dig into the deeper philosophical tissue that Carpenter probably really wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And if he was to do the movie, like say from the 2000s on, where people are, maybe the system was willing to be a little bit more exploratory with somebody like him, the movie probably would have benefited from being like 2+ hours and really diving deep in that world and fleshing out giving us more meat on the bone like you wanted.
Yeah, I don't think it even need to be that far. I mean, you look at, I think this movie came out in 99. It's another one of my favorite horror movies of all time. The Fallen. I mean, you could have done the Fallen type movie with this and it would have been just as good. And you really didn't have those, but I agree with you. I think for the time, this is the movie that had to be made,
This is definitely a film that would, I kind of wish it didn't get to I kind of wish it had gotten like the Dark Horse treatment because Dark Horse was so good about licensing interesting ideas. Yeah. And I would like to have seen Dark Horse explore this post-apocalyptic world that we saw in the future. That would have been fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like I said, I really like this movie. I don't want anybody to think I didn't. I enjoyed this movie, the hell out of this movie. It's just you watch it and you're thinking, how could this movie have been different? And it's like, I will honestly tell you, anybody who's reading my stuff, or is going to read my stuff can probably see it. The Fallen is a seminal work for me. It like really affect The Fallen, The Exorcist, The Omen, everything that I do as far as when I write horror is mostly based around that unholy trilogy of movies. So, that
was part of the reason why I chose this film.
Yeah. But yeah, this movie fits right in there. I mean, the genre, you are absolutely right. This is absolutely cool. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a really good movie.
Yeah. And Jeff's point earlier was true as well, is that the 60s, the 60s started it. The 70s and 80s really were the full realization of this whole concept of demonic possession movies and everything. It really started in the 60s, and there were some, and they were kind of cheesy or whatever. Bride of the Devil, I think was one. But then 70s, you had Rosemary's Baby, and that kicked it off, and then we just took off from there, with Omen and everything else. And for a while there, and then The Fallen is probably right at the tail end when those movies started to tail off. And then they started making remakes of them all, remade everything. But you even had Amityville Horror and all that was coming on, and whatever you believe about that.
Night
But
of
I
the
think,
Demons.
yeah, this is a great discussion. I think really we could go straight from this into a hardcore paranormal discussion about demonology and stuff like that and what the beliefs are, and maybe we'll do that someday. So, but yeah, for now, I think this has just been an incredible deep dive of this movie. I want to thank Steve so much for introducing this movie to me. I'd never seen it. I don't know why. I didn't even realize it was a John Carpenter movie. I remember seeing it in the video store all the time, aging myself. I'm saying just passing it by for some reason. But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. So thank you. So
yeah, no problem.
All right. So with that, we're right on the time we usually try and keep. Like I said, with all these movies, there's so much more we could discuss. But we do these podcasts because we're trying to introduce these older movies to all of you. If you've seen it before, go watch it again. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Because we think these movies are kind of building blocks on the stuff that we love to watch, and we know that you love to watch as well. So, yeah, go check them out. Prince of Darkness. Our next movie is going to be the very classic movie, The Leprechaun. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. We're not watching The Leprechaun.
Gold.
Yeah. I'm the Leprechaun.
Starring Jennifer Aniston before she was Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah, we're not watching that. No, we're going to do something a little different. We've been doing some horror themed stuff, so we're going to get to a different take. And we are going to watch Mike Judge's Idiocracy next. So that is our next film. So until then, wait, we got one more comment from Mike. Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Until next time, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you so much, Jeff.
It was my pleasure to be here, and a shout out to Lance, who couldn't be with us today because he is celebrating his anniversary.
Yes, happy anniversary, Lance. And hopefully he'll be back for Idiocracy next week. I also want to thank Steve.
Yeah, happy anniversary to Lance as well. And it's really been fun talking about this movie. This is one of those, this is not my favorite Carpenter movie, but it's one of the most interesting and one of the least discussed. And I think it's fun, at least for an hour or so, to shine a light on it.
Yeah. And I wouldn't want to leave before, this is not what it's all about, but I want to give some shout outs. Look for a work that Jeff is doing right now for ASAP Imagination, becoming soon, Heritage. That's right. With DT2, who we do Sloppy Spoilers podcast. Steve right now has Blitz and the Blitzverse out for Revelation Comics, so go check that out. And I will be getting OPSEC #1 will be coming out soon from ASAP Imagination Main Continuity, and also The Long Game, a new horror novel coming out through the Anyone world. So look for that. So until next time,
guys, it's really good stuff. It's like me and Steve have read part of it.
Thank you. So I hope you guys like it. So and as we get closer, we'll get more information on all those titles. But right now, definitely go check out Blitz. That's available through Revelation. So until next time, keep the popcorn popping. Keep watching cinema, enjoying those movies. If you have a suggestion, send them in to us. And we'll be back next time on the next episode of Cinema Crusaders.